At the small family dinner where I introduced my new wife, I truly believed my son had finally accepted my decision to remarry. I couldn't have been more wrong. In front of everyone, he walked straight toward my wife, smiled, and said, "Relax, Dad. It's just a loyalty test." Then he shamelessly began flirting with her, while my daughter-in-law quietly raised her phone to record my reaction. They were certain I would lose control. But before I could say a word, my wife placed a small voice recorder on the table, and everything changed. Before we begin, I am so grateful you chose to spend your time here with me today. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from, your city, your state, your country. I read every single one. A quick note. This story contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling and reflection purposes. Any similarity to actual names or places is entirely coincidental, but the lesson at the heart of it is something I hope you carry with you. My name is Walter Gaines, and I am 60 years old. I know what you are thinking. 60 years old, and he is about to tell us a love story. But this is not just a love story. This is the story of how the people I trusted most in this world tried to erase me, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with paperwork, patience, and a plan they had been building for longer than I ever imagined. Let me start with the house. The house in the Westlake Hills neighborhood of Austin, Texas, had 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a wraparound porch, and a kitchen that Sandra had remodeled twice because she could never quite decide between the white oak cabinets and the natural walnut. She chose the walnut in the end. I never touched them after she died. Every morning, I made my coffee standing at that counter, running my hand across the grain of the wood, and I told myself that the hollow feeling in my chest was just hunger. Sandra passed away in the spring of 2020. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the last morning, she squeezed my hand. It was 11 weeks. The doctors used words like aggressive and rapid progression, and I nodded at those words the way you nod at a language you do not speak. I understood the syllables. I did not understand what they meant until I was standing in our bedroom doorway at 5 in the morning, listening to a silence so complete it felt like the house itself had stopped breathing. 4 years had passed since then. 4 years of Sunday mornings with a newspaper I barely read. 4 years of cooking dinner portions that were always too large. 4 years of reaching for my phone to call her before remembering. The grief had not disappeared. It had simply changed shape the way a river changes shape after a long drought, still there, still moving, but quieter and harder to see. I was not a poor man. I want to be honest about that because it matters to this story. Years ago, I had built a mid-sized construction company from a 2-man operation into a firm with over 100 employees. In 2018, I sold a controlling interest to a larger developer and retained a minority stake. The proceeds, along with Sandra's life insurance and the income from 4 rental properties around Austin, were held inside a personal revocable trust, a legal arrangement that I had set up with my attorney, Thomas Brightwell, which meant that I was both the grantor who created the trust and the sole trustee who controlled every dollar inside it. Nobody could touch that money without my signature. That was the point. That was also, as I would later understand, precisely what made me a target. My son Derek called every Sunday at 6 o'clock in the evening. He was 34 years old, sharp-featured, and possessed of a handshake so firm it always felt like a transaction. He had his mother's dark eyes and my stubborn jaw, and when he was 8 years old, he fell off his bicycle on the cracked sidewalk in front of our old house on Ridgewood Drive and split his knee open badly enough to need stitches. I carried him to the car with his arms locked around my neck, and the entire drive to the emergency room, he did not cry once. He just kept asking me in this small, tight voice, full of worry, whether the bicycle was okay. I used to tell that story at dinner parties because it made people laugh, and because I was so proud of him. I am telling it now because I want you to understand what it costs a man to love a child, and then discover 30 years later that the child he loved had been studying him the way a locksmith studies a lock. Derek's Sunday calls were efficient. He asked about my blood pressure, my appetite, whether I had spoken to the cardiologist about the mild arrhythmia that had shown up on a routine EKG 2 years prior. He asked whether I had reviewed the quarterly statements from the trust. He asked these questions the way a property manager asks a tenant about the plumbing, not out of affection, but out of inventory management. I mistook the regularity of those calls for love. I was wrong about that. My younger sister Donna lived 20 minutes away in the Bolden Creek neighborhood, She was 56, a retired elementary school teacher who made the best pecan pie in Travis County, and who had the particular gift of sitting with you in a difficult moment without needing to fill every second with words. She called me on Wednesday evenings and she always asked the same thing. Walt, how are you doing? And I mean actually doing, not the version you tell Derek. Those two questions were very different questions, and she knew it. It was on a Wednesday evening in early September of 2024 when Donna said something that made my chest do a strange, unfamiliar thing. She had been talking about a church fundraiser, and she mentioned almost in passing that Pastor Calvin had asked about me. He said he wants you to come to the fall gala. Donna told me, her voice carrying that particular brightness she reserved for things she was quietly excited about. He also said, and I am quoting him directly here, Walt, so do not shoot the messenger. He said he knows someone he thinks you would genuinely enjoy spending time with. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud for the first time in what felt like weeks, and the sound of it surprised me in that big quiet kitchen with the walnut cabinets. Calvin is setting me up on a blind date, I said. The man baptized my son. The man also knows you better than you know yourself. Donna shot back, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. Just go to the gala, Walt, eat some food, talk to people. You have been in that house so long, the neighbors probably think you are a piece of furniture. I told her I would think about it. That night, I sat alone on the wraparound porch with a glass of sweet tea going warm in my hand, looking out at the yard Sandra had planted with Texas sage and black-eyed Susans, and I thought about what it meant to be 60 years old and still have, God willing, 20 or 30 years of mornings ahead of you. The question was not whether I deserved another chapter. The question was whether I had the courage to open the book. I did not know then what that courage was going to cost me. Then my phone buzzed on the porch railing, a text from Derek. No greeting, no punctuation. Call me when you have a minute. Need to discuss the trust account quarterly review. I looked at that message for a long moment, and something cold and small moved through my stomach. Not fear exactly, not yet, but the distant early warning of it, like the drop in barometric pressure before a storm rolls in off the Gulf. I set the phone face down on the railing and looked back out at Sandra's garden. I should have paid more attention to that feeling. I almost did not go. The morning of the fall gala, I stood in front of my closet for 11 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock on the nightstand trying to decide between the navy blazer Sandra had picked out for me at Nordstrom 3 Christmases before she died, and a plain gray sport coat I had bought myself and never much liked. I chose the navy blazer. It still smelled faintly of the cedar blocks Sandra kept on the closet shelf. I pressed my face against the lapel for just a moment, breathed in, and told myself very firmly that I was not going to cry in my own bedroom on a Saturday evening because I had chosen the right jacket. I cried anyway, not for long, just enough to feel it move through me and out the other side the way a cold front moves through Austin in October, fast, sharp, and then gone, leaving the air cleaner than before. Pastor Calvin Reeves was standing at the entrance of the fellowship hall when I arrived, wearing his good charcoal suit and the bolo tie his late wife had given him, the one with the turquoise stone the size of a quarter. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been weathered by decades of sitting with people in their worst moments, and somehow coming out the other side still believing the world was worth saving. He grabbed my hand with both of his and shook it hard. "Walter Gaines," he said, his voice booming with genuine warmth that filled the entire entryway. "I was starting to think you had forgotten what other human beings looked like." "I see Donna twice a week," I said. "Donna is your sister. She does not count." He steered me through the door with one large hand on my shoulder blade. "Come on. There is someone I want you to meet before she gets cornered by the Hendersons. Once the Hendersons get talking, there is no natural stopping point." The fellowship hall had been transformed by the women of the hospitality committee into something genuinely lovely, round tables with white linen small arrangements of autumn flowers, candles that threw a warm amber light across everything. A string quartet in the corner was playing something I vaguely recognized as Vivaldi. The room was full of people talking and laughing, and I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came from being in a crowd after too long alone, that particular sensation of being simultaneously surrounded and utterly separate from everything around you. Then Calvin touched my elbow and said, "There she is." She was standing at a long table near the far wall, not socializing, not scanning the room for someone to impress. She was organizing a stack of printed programs with the focused, unhurried concentration of a person who had been given a job and intended to finish it properly before moving on to anything else. She wore a simple dark green dress, no elaborate jewelry, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a clean, practical way. She was 55 years old, and she looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had spent her life doing serious work and had stopped needing anyone's approval about it somewhere around 40. Elaine, Calvin said as we approached, "This is my friend Walter Gaines. Walter, this is Elaine Holt." She looked up from the programs and her eyes were a clear, steady gray. The kind of eyes that assess a room, the way a structural engineer assesses a building, looking for load-bearing walls rather than decorative features. "Hello, Walter," she said, and shook my hand with a firm, dry grip. Not performative, just direct. "Hello," I said, and immediately felt that my vocabulary had abandoned me entirely. Calvin, to his eternal credit, excused himself at that exact moment to go check on the catering situation, which we both understood meant he was going to go stand by the dessert table and give us room. "You look like you were trying to remember how conversations work," Elaine said, and the corner of her mouth curved up just slightly. Not a full smile, more like the preliminary motion of one. I felt warmth rush up the back of my neck. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," she said. "But it is also kind of reassuring. Most men at these things walk in already performing. You walked in looking like you genuinely did not know what was going to happen next." She set the last program squarely on the stack. "I find that more interesting. We talked for 3 hours that night. Not continuously, we sat at the same table for dinner, and Calvin joined us. And Donna appeared halfway through the main course and sat down across from me, with the expression of someone trying very hard not to look pleased with themselves. But even in the gaps when other people pulled Calvin away, or Donna leaned over to talk to someone, she recognized Elaine, and I kept finding our way back to each other the way water finds the lowest point in a landscape. She asked me what I liked to read, not what I did for work, not whether I had children, not any of the questions that are really just a polite way of establishing someone's financial coordinates. She asked what I liked to read, and when I said I had been working my way through the complete works of Wallace Stegner, her face did something that I would later come to recognize as her version of genuine enthusiasm, a slight brightening around the eyes, a small forward lean. "Crossing to Safety," she said immediately. "I have read it 4 times. "The scene at the lake," I said. "Every time," she said, and her voice dropped just slightly with the weight of it. "Every single time." We stayed until the hall had nearly emptied. When we finally walked out into the cool October night, our breath making small clouds in the lamplight, I realized that for the past 3 hours I had not thought once about the walnut cabinets, or the 2 large dinner portions, or the Sunday calls that felt like property inspections. My chest felt lighter than it had in 4 years, not healed, not fixed, but lighter, like something had been gently set down. I called Elaine 2 days later. We went for a long walk along Barton Creek Greenbelt on a Tuesday morning when the trail was quiet and the water was still clear from the last rain. She wore running shoes and carried a small water bottle and did not once check her phone. When I told her about Sandra, about the 11 weeks, about the walnut cabinets, she did not say she was sorry. She did not tilt her head and make the expression people make. She just said, "She sounds like someone who knew exactly what she wanted." And somehow, that was the truest and kindest thing anyone had said to me in 4 years. By November, we had settled into a rhythm. Tuesday walks, Thursday evening dinners at small restaurants neither of us had tried before. Occasional Saturday afternoons at the Blanton Museum, where Elaine could stand in front of a single painting for 15 minutes without needing to explain herself or move on. I brought her to the house one Sunday afternoon in late November, and she walked through the rooms with a quiet attentiveness, taking everything in the bookshelves, the photographs, the particular quality of afternoon light through the kitchen windows. When she saw the photograph of Sandra on the living room shelf, the one from the beach trip in 2009, Sandra laughing with her head thrown back and the Gulf of Mexico bright and blue behind her, Elaine looked at it for a long moment. "She had a great laugh," Elaine said softly. "You can see it even in a photograph. Some people's joy is just bigger than the frame trying to hold it." My throat tightened so sharply I had to press my lips together and look at the ceiling for a moment. My eyes burned hot and sudden. "Yeah," I managed. "She really did." Elaine did not reach for me. In that moment, did not try to comfort or redirect. She simply stood there with me and let the feeling be what it was. And somehow that was exactly right. By December, I knew. I was not confused about it, not negotiating with myself, not making lists of pros and cons the way a younger version of me might have. I was 60 years old, and I had learned the hard way that certainty about a person was rare enough that when you found it, you did not spend a lot of time second-guessing it. I asked Elaine to marry me on a quiet Tuesday morning on the same stretch of Barton Creek Trail where we had taken our first walk. She said yes before I had finished the sentence. That evening, I called Derek to tell him. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. When I said the words, "Elaine and I are getting married," with the happiness of them still warm in my chest, there was a silence on the line that lasted so long, I actually pulled the phone away from my ear to check that the call had not dropped. Then Derek's voice came back flat and careful, as a blade laid on a table. "Dad," he said, "I really think you need to slow down and think carefully about this." The warmth in my chest did not disappear all at once. It left the way heat leaves a room when someone opens a window in winter gradually, and then all at once. "I have thought about it," I said. "You have known this woman for 3 months." "I have known what I needed to know." Another pause. When Derek spoke again, his voice had shifted into something I recognized from his business calls, measured strategic, the tone of a man repositioning. "We should talk in person, Dad," he said. "Soon." I said goodnight and set the phone down on the kitchen counter. The house was quiet around me. Outside through the kitchen window, Sandra's Texas sage had gone silver in the moonlight. I pressed my hand flat against the walnut counter and stood there until my breathing steadied. I spent 2 days cleaning the house before the dinner. Not because it needed cleaning, Maria, who came every other Thursday to help with the upkeep, had left it in good order, but because I needed to do something with my hands. I vacuumed the living room carpet twice. I polished the baseboards. I rearranged the books on the shelf in the hallway by author's last name, and then put them back the way they had been because Sandra had organized them by color, and I could not bring myself to change that. I bought fresh flowers, white tulips, and yellow ranunculus, and put them in the blue ceramic vase on the dining room table that Sandra had brought back from a trip to Santa Fe in 2014. Elaine arrived first at 6:30, carrying a bottle of Texas Hill country wine and wearing a deep burgundy blouse that made her gray eyes look almost silver. She set the wine on the kitchen counter and then looked at me, really looked at me the way she did when she was reading something more than what was on the surface. "You are nervous," she said. "I am not nervous," I said. "Walter, you vacuumed twice. I can see the lines going in 2 different directions." I laughed despite myself, and some of the tightness in my shoulders released. She reached up and straightened my collar, her fingers quick and practical, and for one moment, the kitchen felt exactly the right size for 2 people. Donna arrived at 6:45 with her pecan pie and her good wool cardigan, and her expression of barely contained excitement that she was working very hard to tone down to something more appropriate. She pulled me into a hug in the entryway that lasted longer than usual, and when she stepped back, her eyes were shining. "You look happy, Walt," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. "You genuinely look happy, and I cannot tell you how long I have been waiting to say that." My throat pulled tight. "Don't start," I warned her. "I am not starting anything," she said, pressing her lips together and blinking rapidly. "I am simply making an observation, purely objective." Pastor Calvin arrived at 7, predictably 5 minutes late, with the unhurried confidence of a man who understood that events began when he walked in. He shook my hand, kissed Elaine on the cheek, told Donna her pie smelled like salvation, and settled into the armchair in the living room corner as if he had been sitting in it his entire life. Derek and Brooke arrived at 7:15. I heard Derek's car in the driveway, the low, precise sound of the German sedan he had bought himself for his 33rd birthday, and I felt the muscle along my jaw tighten involuntarily. Elaine, standing beside me near the kitchen doorway, touched the back of my hand just once lightly with 2 fingers, not holding, just acknowledging. Derek came through the front door first. He was wearing a charcoal blazer over a dark shirt, no tie, the kind of calculated casual that costs more than most people's formal wear. He was handsome in the way that certain architectural structures are handsome, precise, deliberate, built to project competence. Behind him came Brooke, 31 years old, with straight blonde hair and a smile that arrived at exactly the right moment and departed at exactly the right moment, like a light on a timer. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and carrying a bottle of wine she handed to Derek without looking at him. "Dad," Derek said, and clasped my hand in that firm transactional grip. His eyes moved to Elaine immediately. "And you must be Elaine." "I am," Elaine said, and shook his hand with the same clean directness she had used with me at the gala. "It is good to meet you, Derek." Something passed through Derek's eyes at that, so quickly I almost missed it. Not surprise exactly. More like the recalibration of a person who had expected something different and was adjusting their approach. We moved into the living room. Calvin poured wine. Donna sat on the sofa next to Elaine and immediately began asking her questions about the Blanton Museum exhibit Elaine had mentioned. The room felt warm and almost normal, and for about 20 minutes I allowed myself to believe that the cold note in Derek's voice on the phone 2 weeks ago had been nothing, just surprise, just adjustment. Then I stood up because the moment had come, and I took Elaine's hand and I said the words I had been carrying in my chest for weeks. "I want you all to know," I said, looking around the room at the people I loved most, "that Elaine has agreed to marry me. We are getting married in the spring, and I am the happiest I have been in a very long time." Donna made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, pressing both hands over her mouth, her eyes spilling over immediately. Calvin rose from the armchair with a wide, genuine smile and said, "Walter, that is the best news I have heard all year," and crossed the room to take both our hands. Derek set his wineglass down on the coffee table. He did not set it down gently. The glass met the wood with a sharp, hard click that cut through the room like a crack in ice. Every head turned. Derek stood up slowly and his face had changed completely. The polished social surface gone, replaced by something colder and more deliberate underneath. He looked at Elaine the way a customs agent looks at a passport, checking for inconsistencies, looking for the thing that does not match. "Dad," he said, and his voice was very quiet, which somehow made it worse than if he had shouted. "You are 60 years old. You have known this woman for 3 months?" "Derek," Donna started, her voice sharp. "I am talking to my father, Aunt Donna." He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on me. "I respect that you are lonely, Dad. I do. I understand it. But you are making a decision that affects everything Mom worked to build, everything she left behind. And you are doing it in 3 months, based on what exactly? A good feeling." My chest was burning. My hands down at my sides had closed into fists without my noticing. "Your mother has been gone 4 years. I said, and I was proud of how level my voice came out, even though my heart was slamming against my ribs. "I am not replacing her. I am choosing to live whatever time I have left with someone who makes me feel like living. It is worth something." "That is a very romantic thing to say," Brooke said from the sofa, her voice carrying the pleasant modulated tone of someone reading from a prepared script. She smiled at Elaine with her perfectly timed smile. "It really is. A 55-year-old woman suddenly decides to marry a wealthy man she has known for 3 months. That is quite the love story." The room went absolutely rigid. Elaine did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She sat very straight and her clear gray eyes moved from Brooke to Derek to me. And what I saw in them was not hurt. It was recognition. Like she had been expecting this and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. Donna was on her feet. "Brooke, that is completely uncalled for. I am just saying what everyone is thinking." Brooke said, the smile still perfectly in place. "You are not saying what I'm thinking," Calvin said. And there was something in his pastor's voice, not anger, but a deep, immovable gravity that made Brooke's smile flicker for just a moment. Derek turned back to me. His jaw was set hard, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something that was almost private, meant for me alone, even in a room full of people. "Dad, I love you. And because I love you, I have to be honest with you. The trust, the properties, the accounts, everything Mom helped you build it all, needs to be protected. I am not trying to be cruel. I am trying to make sure you do not look back in 2 years and realize you made a decision you cannot undo." He paused, and then something crossed his face, a small, controlled expression that was almost a smile, but colder than any smile should be. "Think of it this way," he said. "Before we all celebrate, maybe we should make sure everyone's intentions are as good as they seem. Consider it a loyalty test, just to make sure we all know where everyone really stands." He picked up his wineglass from the table, took a measured sip, and looked at Elaine with an expression of perfect practice pleasantness. Elaine looked back at him steadily. She placed her hand over mine, where it sat on my knee, and her grip was firm and warm and completely calm. She did not say a word to Derek, but the way she looked at him, clear, patient, unhurried as if she were reading the first page of a document she fully intended to read to the end, told me everything I needed to know. She had already started. Derek and Brooke left 40 minutes later. The moment the front door closed behind them, Donna exhaled so hard it sounded like she had been holding her breath for an hour. She turned to Elaine and took both her hands. "I am so sorry," Donna said, and her voice was trembling and fierce at the same time. "That was inexcusable, both of them." Elaine squeezed Donna's hands. "You do not need to apologize for them," she said gently. "That was not your doing." Calvin put his hand on my shoulder. "How are you holding up, Walt?" "I am fine," I said, which was not entirely true. My jaw ached from clenching it, and somewhere deep in my chest, there was a pain that felt less like anger and more like grief. The particular grief of watching something you loved reveal an ugliness you could not unsee. Later that night, after Calvin and Donna had gone, Elaine and I stood in the kitchen cleaning up the glasses. Outside, Sandra's Texas sage was dark against the night sky. "Walter," Elaine said quietly, handing me a glass to dry. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "All right," I said. "Did anything Derek said tonight surprise you?" I thought about it. Really thought about it, turning the question over, the way you turn a stone to see what is underneath. "No," I finally said. "I think I have known something was wrong for a while. I just did not want to name it." Elaine nodded slowly, and something settled in her expression. Not relief exactly, but the particular steadiness of a person who has confirmed something they needed to confirm. "Good," she said. "Then we are starting from the same place." She handed me the last glass, and her eyes met mine over the dish towel with that clear structural engineer steadiness that I had noticed the first night at the gala. "Trust me, Walter," she said, "and do not let him see that anything he said tonight landed." I did not fully understand what she meant, but I was about to learn. There is a particular kind of pain that does not announce itself with noise. It does not arrive like a car accident, sudden, loud, impossible to misread. It arrives the way water damage arrives inside a wall. Quietly, gradually. By the time you see the stain spreading across the surface, the structure behind it has already been compromised for a long time. That was what the Sunday dinners became. Derek called me on a Wednesday morning in late December, 2 weeks after the dinner at my house, and his voice had reset itself entirely back to the pleasant, efficient register of our regular check-in calls. He apologized for how the evening had gone. He said he had been caught off guard, that he had reacted poorly, that he was genuinely happy for me and wanted the chance to do better. He suggested that Brooke would love to have Elaine and me over for dinner on Sunday evenings. A chance to build something real, he said. A chance for the family to come together properly. I told Elaine about the call that evening. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going warm between her hands, and she listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me with those clear gray eyes and said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to believe him," I said honestly. "Then we go," she said. "But Walter, pay attention, not to what he says, to what he does." So we went. The first Sunday dinner at Derek and Brooke's house in the Terrytown neighborhood was outwardly pleasant. The house was everything Derek's car had promised: modern, precise, expensive, in a way that was calibrated to appear effortless. Open-plan kitchen and living area, concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out onto a professionally landscaped backyard. Brooke had cooked a brisket that was genuinely good, and she moved through the kitchen with the fluid competence of someone who did most things well and knew it. But I noticed, because Elaine had told me to notice, that Derek had arranged the seating at the dinner table so that he sat to Elaine's left. Not across from her, beside her. I was placed at the head of the table, which felt like a gesture of respect, until I understood that it put me at the maximum possible distance from my own wife. It happened again the second Sunday, and the third. By the fourth Sunday in January, the pattern had clarified itself into something I could not explain away. Derek would arrive at the table last, after everyone was seated, and slide into the chair beside Elaine with the ease of someone taking their regular seat. He poured her wine before anyone else. He asked her opinion on things: the renovation of the backyard pool, a restaurant he was considering investing in, a book review he had read in the Times, with a particular attentiveness, leaning slightly toward her when she answered, nodding as if her words carried unusual weight. It was all individually explainable. Collectively, it was a performance, and the audience was me. "He is doing it again," I said to Elaine on the drive home after the fourth Sunday. My hands were tight on the wheel, tighter than the road required. Right in front of me. Every week he sits next to you and acts like I am not in the room. I know, Elaine said. It does not bother you. She turned to look at me, and in the glow of the dashboard lights her expression was composed and deliberate. It bothers me enormously, she said, but being bothered and showing it are two very different things, and right now, showing it is the one thing we cannot afford to do. Elaine, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped thin by weeks of swallowing things I wanted to say out loud. You keep telling me to wait and to trust you, and I do trust you, I do, but I am 60 years old, and I am sitting at my own son's dinner table watching him. I know exactly what you are watching, she said, and her voice was so quiet and so precise, it cut straight through mine. And I promise you, Walter, every single thing he is doing right now is being recorded. I took my eyes off the road for 1 second to look at her. She was looking straight ahead through the windshield, her hands folded in her lap, her jaw set with a calm that I was only beginning to understand was not the absence of feeling, but its most controlled and purposeful expression. What do you mean, recorded? I asked. I mean that I spent 20 years building cases against people who thought they were untouchable, she said. I know what a pattern looks like when someone is constructing one, and I know that the only way to dismantle a pattern is to document it so thoroughly that no one can argue it away. She paused. Derek is not making mistakes. He is making evidence, and so am I. I gripped the steering wheel and said nothing. For a long moment, the highway lights sliding past us in the dark. How long have you been doing this? I finally asked. Since the night at your house, she said simply. Since he used the words loyalty test. Meanwhile, Brooke's role in the Sunday dinners was something I had initially misread entirely. I had taken her for a passive observer, the poised, well-dressed wife who made good brisket and smiled at the right moments, and otherwise stayed in the background. I was wrong about that too. It was Donna who first pointed it out to me on a Sunday evening in late January when she had joined us for dinner at Derek's. She pulled me aside in the hallway while Derek was opening another bottle of wine in the kitchen and Brooke was clearing plates. Walt, Donna said in a low, urgent voice, gripping my forearm with both hands. Has anyone else noticed that Brooke's phone is always face up on the table? She checks her messages, I said. She is not checking her messages, Donna said, and her eyes were wide and troubled. I have been watching her all evening. The screen stays dark. She never looks down at it. But it is always angled toward wherever Elaine and Derek are sitting. She pressed her fingers harder into my arm. Walt, I think she is recording video. The floor of the hallway felt suddenly less solid under my feet. I thought about the way Brooke always arrived at the table after Elaine was already seated, the way the phone appeared on the tablecloth so naturally it seemed like an afterthought, the way she positioned herself never in the shot but always behind the camera. Do not react, Elaine said from behind us, both so quietly that I startled. Donna and I both turned. Elaine had come down the hallway without either of us hearing her, and she stood there with the same composed, unhurried expression she had worn every Sunday for the past month. I know about the phone, Elaine said, looking at Donna with something that was almost warm. I have known for 3 weeks. Donna's mouth dropped open. And you have not said anything, no. Elaine looked at me. Because if she knows that we know, she stops. And right now, every video she is collecting is building a record of exactly what this is. Brooke thinks she is documenting evidence against me. The corner of her mouth moved that small preliminary motion I had learned to recognize. She is documenting evidence against herself. I stood in that hallway between my sister and my wife and felt the ground shift under everything I thought I understood about what was happening in my life. Elaine, I said, and my voice came out low and unsteady. What exactly are we dealing with here? She looked at me steadily. Her gray eyes were very clear. I am not entirely sure yet, she said, but I am going to find out. And when I do, I am going to need you to be ready. Ready for what? Ready to let me do what I know how to do, she said, without stepping in, without confronting him, without letting him see anything on your face that tells him we are ahead of him. I looked at my wife in that hallway with the sound of Derek's laughter carrying from the kitchen, and I felt two things simultaneously: a cold, creeping dread at whatever she was building toward, and something else underneath it, something solid and surprising. Trust. Complete bone-level trust. All right, I said. "Tell me what to do." "Come back to the table," Elaine said, and straightened the collar of my jacket with two quick, precise fingers, exactly as she had done in my kitchen the night we told everyone we were getting married. "Smile at your son, drink your wine, let him think this is all going exactly the way he planned." We walked back down the hallway together. Behind us, I heard Brooke's phone click softly against the tablecloth as she set it back in position. I smiled at my son across the dinner table and felt my heart hammering so hard against my ribs, I was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Derek smiled back at me with all his teeth. There are things you see that your brain files away before your conscious mind has decided what to do with them. A detail that does not fit. A moment that is slightly off-key, the way a single instrument in an orchestra plays a half beat behind the others, not wrong enough to stop the music, but wrong enough that the ear catches it and holds on. You file it away. You tell yourself it is nothing. And then 3 weeks later, when everything finally comes apart, you reach back into the mental file and understand exactly what you were looking at all along. That was the coffee shop. It was a Tuesday morning in early February, cold by Austin standards, which meant the temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and half the city was wearing their heaviest coats as if they were preparing for an Arctic expedition. I had driven into the South Congress neighborhood to pick up a book I had ordered from the independent bookstore on the corner, and on the way back to the car, I stopped at a small coffee shop called Hillside Roasters, because the line at my usual place had wrapped around the block and I had never much liked waiting in lines. I was standing at the counter waiting for my order when I saw Derek through the window. He was sitting at a corner table near the back of the shop, mostly obscured by a structural column and a large potted fig tree, which I think was why he had not seen me come in. He was not on his phone. He was not on his laptop. He was leaning slightly forward in his chair, both forearms on the table, giving his full attention to the woman sitting across from him. She was somewhere in her early 50s, I estimated. Professional, in a specific clinical way, not the sharp professional of someone in finance or law, but the quieter, more measured professional of someone in a field that required careful listening. She wore wire-rimmed glasses and a gray wool blazer, and she had a leather portfolio open on the table in front of her that she was writing in as Derek talked, not taking notes casually, writing with the focused, deliberate pace of someone documenting something. I watched for perhaps 90 seconds. Long enough to see Derek reach into the inside pocket of his jacket and produce a white envelope, thick-sealed, the kind of envelope that carries either a contract or a considerable amount of cash. He slid it across the table. The woman in the gray blazer looked at it, opened it slightly with one finger to confirm the contents, and then closed it again and slid it into her portfolio without a word. Their whole interaction lasted less than 15 minutes. When Derek stood to leave, he did not look around the coffee shop the way a guilty man looks around. He looked around the way a careful man looks around, which is a different thing entirely and considerably more troubling. He did not see me. I paid for my coffee, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, with the engine idling and the heater running, and a feeling in my stomach that I could not name but could not ignore. That evening, I told Elaine everything. We were in the kitchen after dinner, and I described the woman in as much detail as I could remember. The wire-rimmed glasses, the gray wool blazer, the leather portfolio, the way she wrote with that particular focused deliberateness, the white envelope that Derek had produced from his inside pocket. Elaine stood at the kitchen counter with her arms crossed and her head slightly tilted the way she stood when she was running something through a mental framework I did not have access to. She asked me 3 questions in quick succession, her voice clipped and precise. How old approximately? Early 50s maybe, 52, 53. The portfolio leather, what color? Dark brown, well used. She treated it like something she carried everywhere. When Derek handed her the envelope, did she count what was inside or just confirm it was there? I thought about it carefully. Confirmed, one finger, one look, then closed it. Elaine uncrossed her arms and turned to face the window over the sink, and I watched the muscles in her jaw work for a moment, with the particular tension of a person processing something quickly and not liking where it was landing. "You know who she is?" I said. It was not a question. "I have a strong suspicion," Elaine said carefully, "but I need to verify it before I say anything." "Elaine." My voice came out harder than I intended, rougher at the edges, scraped by weeks of being patient and watchful, and swallowing every instinct I had. "I am your husband. Whatever you are thinking, I need to know. She turned from the window and looked at me, and I saw something in her face I had not seen before. Not uncertainty exactly, but a careful weighing of what to share and when. Like a doctor deciding how much of a diagnosis to give a patient in a single sitting. If I am right about who that woman is, she said slowly, then what Derek is building is considerably more serious than I initially thought, and I need to be certain before I alarm you unnecessarily. She held my gaze. Give me 48 hours. I wanted to push harder. My chest was tight with the pressure of everything I was not being told, and the part of me that had run a construction company for 20 years, the part that solved problems by confronting them directly, was pulling hard against the patience Elaine kept asking me to maintain. But I looked at her face, at the steadiness in it, the absolute lack of panic even as she processed something that had clearly disturbed her. And I thought about the fact that this woman had spent 2 decades dismantling the financial crimes of people who believed they were untouchable, and that she had never once in all those years moved before she was ready. 48 hours, I said. She nodded. Then she picked up her tea from the counter and said in a tone so measured it made the words feel more significant rather than less, Walter, I need to ask you something practical. Go ahead. Your trust, the revocable trust you set up with Thomas Brightwell, you are the sole trustee, correct? No co-trustee, no successor. Trustee currently active. The question landed strangely coming out of nowhere, in the middle of everything else. That is correct, I said. Thomas set it up that way at my request. I have always managed my own affairs. Good, Elaine said, and the word came out with a quiet, concentrated relief that made the back of my neck prickle. That is very good. Do not change that. Do not sign anything that modifies that structure under any circumstances, regardless of what anyone tells you. The reason is. Elaine, what are you? 48 hours, she said again, and her voice was gentle but absolute. I promise you, Walter. 48 hours, and I will tell you everything. She set her tea down and picked up her phone from the counter, and I watched her type a message to someone, quickly, purposefully, before setting it back down without showing me the screen. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller than it had 5 minutes ago. Outside, a cold February wind was moving through Sandra's Texas sage, bending the silver-gray branches in long, slow waves. I stood at the window and watched it for a long time, and I thought about the woman in the gray wool blazer with the leather portfolio and the careful documenting handwriting. I thought about what kind of professional writes with that particular focused deliberateness. I thought about the white envelope sliding across a table in a coffee shop on South Congress Avenue. And I thought about Elaine's voice when she had said that last word, good, with that concentrated prickling relief. The 48 hours were going to feel very long. Then my phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Derek. Hey Dad, just checking in. How are you feeling these days? Sleeping okay? Eating well? 3 questions about my physical health in a row, from a man who had never once in 34 years called to ask how I was sleeping. I set the phone back down on the counter without answering. My hands were not shaking, but they wanted to. 48 hours later, Elaine knocked on the door of my study at 10 o'clock at night. She was carrying her laptop and a manila folder, thick enough that the edges had started to curl. She set both on my desk. Without preamble, pulled the second chair around to sit beside me, rather than across from me, and opened the laptop. I need you to look at something, she said, and I need you to let me explain it completely before you react. I looked at her face. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were clear and steady, and carrying the particular gravity of someone about to deliver a diagnosis they had been hoping was wrong. All right, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. She turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a Delaware Secretary of State Business Registry page, a public database freely accessible to anyone with an internet connection. The company name at the top of the page read, Brightstone Capital Advisors, LLC. Formation date 14 months ago. Registered agent, a law office in Wilmington that Elaine told me specialized in anonymous shell company formations. Delaware allows LLC formation with minimal disclosure requirements. Elaine said, her voice taking on the precise, unhurried cadence I recognized from the few times she had talked about her old work. No requirement to list the actual owners publicly, which is why people who want to move money without being identified use Delaware entities. Who owns it? I asked. Officially, a woman named Carol Yates Brooks' first cousin. Elaine clicked to the next screen, a bank statement with several lines highlighted in yellow. Unofficially, Derek controls it entirely. And look at where the money is coming from. I leaned forward and looked at the highlighted lines. The source account was a secondary investment account attached to my trust, one I had largely forgotten about, a legacy account from a real estate partnership that had been quietly generating modest returns for years. Deposits had been flowing out of that account in amounts just under $10,000, routed through Brightstone Capital and landing in a Nevada LLC called Summit Ridge Holdings. My stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my knees. "How much?" I asked. "In the past 14 months, just over $280,000. The number hit me like a physical thing. I pushed back from the desk and stood up because I could not sit still, pacing to the window and back, my hands pressed flat against the sides of my legs because I did not know what else to do with them. "Walter," Elaine's voice was firm and careful, "I need you to keep listening. He stole from me," I said, and my voice cracked straight down the middle on the last word, breaking open in a way I had not allowed it to do in a very long time. "He has been stealing from me for over a year, and I did not. He has been stealing from you and building infrastructure to steal significantly more," Elaine said. "That is the part you need to understand." She stood up and came to where I was standing by the window, and she put both hands on my arms, firm, grounding the way you hold someone who is standing too close to an edge. "What he has done so far constitutes wire fraud under 18 United States Code, Section 1343. She said, each citation delivered with the steadiness of someone who had said these words in courtrooms. "The routing of money through multiple state lines triggers federal jurisdiction automatically. The structuring of deposits just under the $10,000 reporting threshold required by the Bank Secrecy Act adds a separate charge called structuring under 31 United States Code, Section 5324, and the use of shell companies to conceal the origin and destination of the money is money laundering under 18 United States Code, Section 1956. I stared at her. "You are describing federal felonies." "3 separate categories of them, yes." Her grip on my arms tightened slightly. "And there are 4 shell companies total, not 1. Across 3 states. This is not a son who got greedy and made a bad decision. This is an organized financial operation that has been running for over a year." The room felt like it was tilting. "The woman from the coffee shop," I said. Elaine nodded. "Dr. Fiona Marsh, licensed psychologist, Austin practice. Derek paid her to conduct a preliminary competency evaluation, an assessment of your mental fitness to manage your own financial affairs." She paused to let that land. "If she signs off on a formal report, Derek can file a petition with Travis County Probate Court under Texas Estates Code, Chapter 1101, requesting that a guardian be appointed to manage your trust on your behalf." The word guardian went through me like cold water. "He wants to have me declared incompetent," I said. "He wants legal control of your assets," Elaine said. "And the loyalty test, the dinners, the harassment, the texts, all of it is designed to destabilize you emotionally, so that when you finally react, there is a documented pattern of erratic behavior to support his petition." I turned to the window. Outside, the February wind moved through Sandra's garden in long, dark waves, and I stood there with my chest heaving and my eyes burning. And 20 years of loving a child, I apparently had never truly known, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I wanted to get in my car and drive to Derek's house and pound on the door and demand he look me in the eye and tell me why. "Don't," Elaine said quietly, reading me with the accuracy she always had. "I know," I said. "We cannot move yet. What I have is enough to show a pattern, but not enough for federal prosecution. We need Derek to keep going. We need him to believe he is winning." She moved to stand beside me at the window. "Can you do that? Walter, can you walk back into that house on Sunday and sit at that table and let him think that nothing has changed?" I pressed one hand against the cold glass of the window and felt the February chill seeping through it against my palm. "He asked me 3 questions about my health the other night," I said. "In a text. He has never once asked me how I was sleeping in 34 years. I know. He's building a file on me. Yes." I stood there for a long moment, breathing carefully, letting the grief and the fury move through me in waves until they settled into something harder and colder and more useful. "Tell me what you need," I finally said. Elaine looked at me with those clear gray eyes, and for the first time since the night at the gala, I saw something in them that was not composure. It was ferocity, quiet and contained and absolute. "More time," she said, "and your trust." "You have always had my trust," I said. She took my hand, and we stood at the window together, while the wind moved through Sandra's garden, below bending the silver sage in long, slow waves. "We need one more thing," she said quietly. "We need him to do it publicly. I have learned that the hardest kind of acting is not playing a stranger. It is playing yourself the version of yourself that existed before you knew what you now know, while carrying everything you have learned like a stone lodged behind your sternum. Every smile costs something. Every casual question costs something. Every time you pick up a wine glass and say, 'This is really good, Derek. Where did you find it?' While knowing what you know, a small piece of something inside you quietly calculates the price." By March, the Sunday dinners had taken on a rhythm that felt almost normal from the outside, which was the most unsettling thing about them. Derek had escalated. Not dramatically, he was too careful for drama, but the increments had increased the way a fever climbs in half-degree steps that are individually dismissible until you look at the total and understand that the body is in serious trouble. The Sunday that broke something open happened in the second week of March. We were seated at Derek's dining table, the long walnut one that Brooke had sourced from a reclaimed lumber place in Bastrop, when Derek told a story about a real estate deal he had closed in San Marcos. It was a good story, the kind he told well, and halfway through it, he turned to Elaine and placed his hand on the back of her chair. Not on her shoulder, on the chair, just behind her. His arm stretched behind her like a parenthesis, enclosing her in the story, and he said, with a wide, easy grin that sent ice straight down my spine, "If I hadn't moved fast on that property honestly, I would have had to retire early and find better company. Isn't that right, Elaine?" The table laughed. The two cousins Derek had invited that evening laughed. Brooke smiled her timer smile. I laughed too. It was the worst sound I had ever heard come out of my own body. Under the table, my right hand had closed around my knee so tightly that my knuckles had gone white, and my fingers were leaving marks in the fabric of my slacks. Elaine, seated beside me, shifted almost imperceptibly and pressed her knee firmly against mine. One steady, deliberate point of contact. "Hang on, I know. Hang on." After dinner, while Derek and Brooke cleared the plates, Donna appeared at my elbow and steered me toward the hallway bathroom with a grip on my arm that left no room for argument. She closed the door behind us and turned to face me, and her eyes were bright and fierce and full of a distress she had been sitting on all evening. "Walt," she said, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper, both hands wrapped around my forearm. "How long has he been doing this?" "Donna, do not say nothing is happening." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I have been watching him for weeks and telling myself I was imagining it, and tonight I am done pretending I do not see what I see." He put his arm around her chair at the dinner table. "In front of you, in front of everyone." Her eyes went wet and furious. "He is your son, Walt. What is wrong with him?" The question hit me like a fist to the sternum. What is wrong with him? The question I had been asking myself every night since February, lying in the dark, with the answer growing clearer and more terrible with each passing week. "I know," I said, and my voice came out low and rough. "I know something is wrong, and I am handling it. But I need you to do something very difficult for me, Donna. I need you to go back to that table and act like nothing happened." Her face crumpled. "Walt, please." I gripped her hands in both of mine, and my own hands were not entirely steady. "I cannot explain everything right now, but I promise that what is happening is being addressed. I just need a little more time." She stared at me for a long moment, her chest rising and falling hard, her jaw working. "Are you safe?" she finally asked. "Are you and Elaine safe?" "Yes," I said. "Is Elaine handling this?" I thought about the laptop, the highlighted bank statements, the manila folder with its curled edges. I thought about Elaine's voice saying, "We need him to do it publicly." "Yes," I said. "More than I can tell you right now." Donna pressed her lips together so hard they went white. Then she pulled her hands free, straightened her cardigan, and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long, steadying moment. "Fine," she said. "But Walt, after this is over, whatever this is, you were going to tell me everything." "Everything," I agreed. We walked back out to the dinner table together. Later that night, long after we had said our goodbyes and driven home in the dark, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel the full weight of the evening. Derek's arms stretched behind Elaine's chair, the cousins laughing, my own terrible hollow laugh joining in. My eyes burned hot and sudden, and I pressed the heels of both hands against them hard enough to see sparks. Elaine sat down beside me. She did not reach for me immediately. She let me have the moment first, which was exactly right. Then she said, "He is getting impatient." I dropped my hands and looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means he is going to move soon," she said. "The escalation at the table tonight, that was not confidence. That was pressure. He is trying to force a reaction from you before his timeline." She looked at me steadily. "Which means we need to move faster too." She reached over and took my hand, and her grip was firm and warm. "I am calling Thomas Brightwell tomorrow morning," she said. The text came at 11:17 on a Tuesday night. I know the exact time because I had been lying awake staring at the ceiling, and when Elaine's phone lit up the bedroom with its pale screen glow, I turned my head and watched her reach for it. She read it without sitting up. Then she held the phone out to me across the pillow without a word, and I took it and read it myself. "Hey, Elaine. Sorry to bother you so late. Just wanted to check in. Dad seemed a little off at dinner last Sunday, quieter than usual. Is everything okay with him? Has he mentioned anything to you about how he's been feeling?" I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, and the third time, the full shape of it landed the false intimacy of, "Hey, Elaine," the performance of concern about me, the deliberate late-night timing designed to feel personal and private. My jaw clenched so hard, my back teeth ached. "He has sent 3 before this one," Elaine said quietly. "Over the past 2 weeks, all late at night, all framed around concern for you." I sat up. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have called him," she said simply. "And that is exactly what he wants." She was right. I knew she was right. That did not make the knowing any easier to sit with. She took the phone back, typed a brief neutral reply. "He seems fine to me, Derek. I'll let him know you asked and set it face down on the nightstand." "He is building a paper trail," I said. "Yes, documented concern from a devoted son. It will look very considerate in a court filing." I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there with my elbows on my knees and my face in my hands, breathing carefully through the anger. Outside the window, the March night was very still. 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon, I drove across town to meet Thomas Brightwell. Thomas had been my attorney for 19 years, a compact, precise man of 62, with silver hair and the unhurried confidence of someone who had seen most varieties of human trouble and was rarely surprised by any of them. His office occupied the 12th floor of a building on Congress Avenue with a view of Lady Bird Lake that Sandra had always loved. When I walked in, he stood up and shook my hand and looked at my face and said, without any preamble at all, "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I brought my wife," I said, and Elaine walked in behind me. We were there for 2 hours. Elaine laid out everything: the shell companies, the wire, transfers, the Bank Secrecy Act, violations, the payments to Dr. Marsh. Thomas listened without interrupting, making notes in the small, precise handwriting of a man who had been taking legal notes for 40 years. When Elaine finished, he set his pen down and looked at us both. "This is federal territory," he said. "Well past what a civil attorney handles alone. I need to make a call." That call was to Agent Roy Tillman of the FBI Financial Crimes Division in Dallas. Thomas had worked with Tillman twice before on elder financial abuse cases, and he trusted him. The meeting was set for the following week. I was almost back at the car when my phone rang. Derek. I let it ring 4 times, composing my face and my voice into something neutral, then answered. "Hey, Dad." His voice was warm and easy. "Do you have plans this afternoon? I thought maybe I'd swing by. Haven't seen the house in a while." "I'm actually on my way out," I said, "running some errands." "Oh, no worries. How about later, say around 4? "I'll be out most of the day," I said. "Let's catch up on Sunday." A brief pause. "Sure, Dad, of course." I hung up and looked at Elaine across the roof of the car. "He wants to come to the house," I said. "I know," she said. "And now that he knows you are out for the afternoon, he may try anyway." We exchanged one long look over the car roof. Then Elaine said, "Go run your errands, Walter. Genuinely. Take your time and leave this to me." I did not like it. Every instinct I had fired against it. But I had made a promise to trust her completely, and I had meant it. I drove to the hardware store. I bought weather stripping that I did not need. I walked every aisle twice. I ate lunch alone at a diner on Lamar Boulevard, chewing slowly and watching the traffic outside and keeping my phone face up on the table in case Elaine needed me. She did not call. When I got home 2 hours later, Elaine was in the kitchen making coffee calm as a Sunday morning. She looked up when I came in and said, "He came." The air went out of my lungs. "What happened?" "He brought flowers," she said. "Peonies." At the third Sunday dinner, Brooke had a vase of them on the table, and I said something brief that I had always loved them, that my mother used to grow them. I forgot I said it. Derek did not forget. She set 2 mugs on the counter, and her voice was completely level. That is what made it frightening, not the flowers, the fact that he had been keeping notes. He stood in the doorway and told me he was just checking on his father's household, and that he wanted to make sure I understood how much this family meant to him. And then he said, she paused and something moved through her eyes, a brief cold flash. He said that a woman in my position should be very careful about the decisions she made going forward. That loyalty was a fragile thing, that he hoped I understood what he was really asking. My vision went sharp at the edges with a fury I had to breathe through hard. "He threatened you," I said. "He tried to," Elaine said. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and set a small black digital recorder on the kitchen counter between us. "Every word of it. Texas is a one-party consent state under Penal Code, Section 16.02, which means that as a participant in that conversation, I had the full legal right to record it without his knowledge." I stared at the recorder. "He handed us a felony," Elaine said quietly, "on a Friday afternoon, with peonies." I looked at the recorder. "What about the Sunday dinners you said you had been recording since January?" "I have," she said. "But at those tables, Derek was always careful, close enough to the line to be uncomfortable, never far enough over it to be prosecutable. He performed for an audience at those dinners." Elaine looked at me steadily. "Today there was no audience. He thought he was alone with a woman he had already decided he could intimidate. That is the only time people say exactly what they mean." She poured the coffee and slid my mug across the counter, and her hands were completely steady. Mine were not. The envelope was in the mailbox on a Monday morning in early April. No return name. Just a law office address on West 6th Street and an official seal from Travis County Probate Court, printed in the upper left corner in that particular shade of bureaucratic blue that exists nowhere else in the natural world. I stood at the end of the driveway in my bathrobe and slippers holding it and felt something happen to the morning around me, the bird song going distant, the neighbor's sprinklers fading out, everything narrowing to the weight of that envelope between my fingers. It was not heavy. Official documents rarely are. The damage they carry has nothing to do with their weight. I brought it inside and sat down at the kitchen table and opened it. I read the title at the top of the first page 3 times before the words fully assembled themselves into meaning. Application for appointment of guardian of the estate in the matter of Walter James Gaines, Travis County Probate Court. My son had filed a petition with the court to have me declared legally incompetent to manage my own financial affairs. I kept reading because stopping felt like surrender. The application cited under Texas Estates Code Chapter 1101 that a concerned family member had observed significant changes in the respondent's judgment, decision-making capacity, and vulnerability to undue influence, particularly in matters related to financial assets and recent relationship choices. Attached to the petition was a preliminary psychological assessment signed by Dr. Fiona Marsh, licensed psychologist, Austin, Texas. Dr. Fiona Marsh, the woman in the gray wool blazer, the woman who had taken Derek's white envelope at a corner table in a coffee shop on South Congress Avenue and written with that careful documenting handwriting. She had never examined me, never sat across from me in a clinical setting, never asked me a single question, never administered a single assessment instrument. Her preliminary report was based entirely on information provided by, and I quote, a concerned family member with direct and regular observation of the respondent, my son. I set the papers down on the kitchen table and pressed both palms flat against the wood and breathed. I want to describe what that moment felt like precisely because I do not think there is a word in common usage that covers it adequately. It was not anger, though anger was present. It was not humiliation, though, that was present, too hot and immediate and deeply personal, in the way that only a violation of dignity can be. It was something older and more fundamental than either of those things. It was erased. Someone, my own child, had looked at 60 years of my life, at everything I had built and decided and chosen and survived, and had filed a legal document declaring that I was no longer capable of being the author of my own story, that my name should be removed from the decisions of my own existence and handed to him for safekeeping. I heard Elaine's footsteps on the stairs. She came into the kitchen in her robe, saw my face, and crossed the room immediately. She picked up the papers without asking and read them standing at the counter, and I watched her face as she read. She did not gasp. She did not flinch. But her jaw tightened incrementally with each page, and by the time she set the papers down, the muscle along her jawline was working in a way I had only seen once before, the night I had told her about the $280,000. "He moved faster than I expected," she said. "Elaine." My voice came out cracked and low-scraped hollow. "He filed a court document saying I am not capable of managing my own life." "I know. He paid a psychologist who has never met me to sign a report saying I am losing my judgment." "I know, Walter. I built a company from nothing." My voice was rising despite every effort I made to hold it level, cracking at the edges, with something that was grief and fury in equal measure. "I raised him. I paid for his school, his first car, the down payment on his house. And he filed a document with a court of law saying I am not capable of—" "Walter." Elaine set her hands on either side of my face, and the directness of it, the simple grounding physicality of it, stopped me. Her gray eyes were right in front of mine, clear and fierce and utterly certain. "Listen to me. This document is not evidence of your incompetence. It is evidence of his desperation, and desperation makes people sloppy." I pressed my lips together hard. My eyes were burning. Texas Estates Code, Chapter 11. 01 requires the court to appoint an attorney ad litem, she said, her thumbs pressing gently against my jaw. "An independent attorney whose sole job is to represent your interests, not Derek's, not the court's, yours. Derek cannot control that appointment. He cannot influence that attorney, and any competency evaluation ordered by the court will be conducted by an independent examiner, not by a psychologist he paid in a coffee shop." I exhaled slowly. "He does not know that we know about Dr. Marsh." "No," Elaine said. "He does not, and that is a significant problem for him." She lowered her hands from my face, and her expression shifted into something harder and more purposeful. "This petition is the sloppiest thing he has done. He filed it too early with insufficient clinical documentation, using a psychologist with a direct financial relationship to the petitioner. Thomas is going to have a great deal to say about that." I looked down at the papers on the table, my name at the top of a probate court filing. Walter James Gaines, respondent. "Call Thomas," I said. "I already texted him from the stairs," Elaine said. Of course she had. Thomas Brightwell called back within 20 minutes. I put him on speaker at the kitchen table, and he listened to everything without interrupting. And when I finished reading him the key sections of the petition, his response was immediate and unambiguous. "Walter?" He said, his voice carrying the flat, certain calm of a man who had been in courtrooms for 4 decades. "This petition has 3 fatal procedural flaws that I can identify before I have even read the full document. Dr. Marsh's assessment is clinically indefensible without a direct examination. The petition was filed without the mandatory pre-filing notice to the respondent required under Texas Estates Code, Section 110105. And Derek's documented financial interest in the outcome of this proceeding represents a conflict of interest that borders on fraud upon the court." I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the first thin crack of light through something that had been entirely dark. "What do we do?" I asked. "We file a response," Thomas said, "and then we do something Derek is not expecting." A pause. "We go on offense." We are halfway through this story now, and what Walter just found in that mailbox changes everything that comes next. Before I go further, drop the number 60 in the comments to let me know you are still here with me. Every single comment means the world. A gentle reminder, this story contains some fictional elements crafted for reflection and meaningful storytelling. Some details may not reflect any specific events. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, it is completely okay to step away now. But if you are staying, I am glad. Thomas Brightwell's office on the 12th floor of the Congress Avenue building had a particular quality of light in the late afternoon, the kind that comes off still water, calm and indirect filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Lady Bird Lake. Sandra had loved that view. I had been in this office dozens of times over 19 years, and every time I sat in the chair across from Thomas's desk, I thought of her saying once on the drive home from a routine estate planning meeting that there was something reassuring about a lawyer with a beautiful view. It meant he had been doing this long enough to earn the window. I was not thinking about that today. Thomas had the petition spread across his desk. When Elaine and I arrived, annotated in the margins with his small, precise handwriting, red ink, marking 3 separate sections. He stood when we came in, gestured to the chairs, and got directly to the point in the way that I had always valued about him, and valued even more right now. "I filed a formal response to the petition this morning," he said, settling back into his chair. "The response cites the 3 procedural deficiencies I outlined on the phone: the absence of direct clinical examination, the failure to provide mandatory pre-filing notice under Texas Estates Code, Section 11-0105, and the undisclosed financial relationship between Dr. Marsh and the petitioner." He folded his hands on the desk. In ordinary circumstances, that response would be sufficient to have the petition dismissed or significantly delayed. But I do not think ordinary circumstances are what we are dealing with here. "No," Elaine said, "they are not." Thomas looked at her steadily. In the weeks since I had first brought Elaine to this office, I had watched Thomas recalibrate his assessment of her in real time, the particular recalibration of a careful man who had initially underestimated someone and was correcting that error with full professional attention. "The financial documentation you have compiled," he said to her, "is considerably more comprehensive than anything I would have expected to be assembled privately. The shell company structures the interstate transfer records, the email chain. This is the work of someone who knows exactly how federal financial crimes are prosecuted. 20 years of forensic accounting tends to provide a working familiarity," Elaine said. "It does," Thomas said. He opened a desk drawer and produced a business card, which he slid across the desk toward Elaine. "Which is why I took the liberty of sharing a summary of your findings with this person before our meeting today. I hope that was not overstepping." Elaine picked up the card and read it. Then she looked at Thomas with an expression that was as close to surprised as I had ever seen on her face. "You know Roy Tillman," she said. "We worked 2 elder financial abuse cases together in 2021, Thomas said. "He is thorough, he is honest, and he does not move until he is certain. He also called me back within 40 minutes of receiving my summary, which tells you something about how interested he is in what you have found." The door to the conference room opened. Agent Roy Tillman was a compact man of 48, with a flat Midwestern face and the kind of stillness that comes not from passivity, but from discipline, the stillness of someone who had learned that the most useful thing in most rooms was to observe more than you revealed. He wore a plain dark suit, no tie, and carried a leather portfolio that was, I noticed, remarkably similar to the one Dr. Fiona Marsh had carried in the coffee shop. He shook my hand first, then Elaine's, then sat down and opened his portfolio without any social preamble whatsoever. "Mr. Gaines," he said, looking at me directly, "I want to be straightforward with you because I think you deserve that. The Financial Crimes Division in our Dallas field office has had an open investigation into a money laundering network operating out of Nevada for approximately 8 months. We have documented the network structure, we have identified the principal operators, and we have traced the movement of funds through a series of Delaware and Wyoming shell companies." He paused. "What we have not been able to identify until 10 days ago is the Austin connection, the local financial infrastructure that was being used to introduce clean capital into the network to legitimize the dirty money flowing through it." He turned to Elaine. "The documentation you compiled," he said, "identifies that connection with a specificity that 8 months of federal investigation did not achieve. Brightstone Capital Advisors is the bridge entity we have been looking for. The transfers from your husband's trust account are what the network has been using to establish a paper trail of legitimate investment activity." The room was very quiet. "My son," I said, and the 2 words came out flat and stripped of everything except their bare factual weight, "has been using my family's money to launder proceeds from a criminal network." "That is what the evidence indicates, yes," Tillman said. He did not soften it or dress it up. I appreciated that more than I could say. "What do you need from us?" Elaine asked. "What I need," Tillman said, "is a documented instance of the conspiracy being articulated publicly in front of witnesses in a context that establishes knowing and willful intent beyond a reasonable doubt. Financial records establish the mechanism, but for a federal prosecution to succeed at trial, we need the human element. We need someone on record stating the purpose." He looked at me. "Your son is careful. He has conducted his financial operations through layers of legal insulation. But the guardianship petition changes his calculus. He is moving faster now, which means he is more likely to be explicit." "He already has been explicit," Elaine said, and produced the small black recorder from her bag and set it on the conference table. Tillman looked at it. Then he looked at Elaine with the focused, recalibrated attention of a man revising his estimates upward in real time. "May I?" he said. "That is why I brought it," she said. He listened to the recording of Derek in our doorway, the flowers, the veiled threat, the careful language that was just explicit enough to be damning and just deniable enough that Derek had clearly believed he was safe. When it finished, Tillman closed his portfolio with a quiet, definitive click. "Mrs. Holt," he said, "this recording establishes predatory intent under the Elder Justice Act's financial exploitation provisions and corroborates the conspiracy elements of the wire fraud charges." He looked between us both. "I can have arrest warrants prepared within 30 days, but I need one more thing." "The public statement," Elaine said. "Yes." Tillman looked at me. "I understand that asking you to continue to engage with your son while knowing what you know is significant. I want you to understand that I do not make that request lightly." I looked at Elaine. She looked back at me with those clear gray eyes, steady and certain and completely present. "Derek is going to host a large family gathering soon," I said to Tillman. "He always does when he thinks things are going his way. There will be 30 people there, lawyers, business contacts, people he wants as witnesses." Tillman nodded slowly. "When?" "Within the month," Elaine said. "I am certain of it." Tillman looked at me one more time with that flat, direct gaze. "Mr. Gaines, I know this is your son. I want you to know that what you are doing takes a kind of courage that most people in your position do not have." I looked out at the view of Lady Bird Lake, the flat, calm water catching the late afternoon light, the way Sandra had always loved. "He made his choices," I said. "I am making mine." We had agreed, Elaine and I, that we would attend one final Sunday dinner at Derek's house before the party. Not because we wanted to, not because sitting at that table had gotten any easier in the weeks since I had learned what I knew, but because disappearing from the pattern would tell Derek that something had shifted, and the one thing we could not afford was for him to change his behavior before Agent Tillman had what he needed. So we went. Donna was already there when we arrived, sitting at the far end of the living room with a glass of sparkling water, and the careful, contained expression of someone who had been told to behave and was finding it considerably more difficult than anticipated. She had called me twice during the week, once to ask if I was sleeping, once to ask if Elaine was eating enough, which was Donna's specific way of expressing that she was frightened and did not know what to do with her hands. I had told her both times that everything was under control. She had not entirely believed me either time, but she had stopped pushing, which was the best I could ask for. Derek was in exceptional form that evening. There was something almost terrible about watching him work the room, the easy laughter, the precise attentiveness to each guest, the way he moved through his own house with the fluid confidence of a man who believed completely that everything was proceeding according to his design. He was good at this. I had always known he was good at this. What I had not understood until recently was that the skill itself was the warning I should have heeded years ago. Dinner was brisket again, Derek's fallback for important occasions, and the table conversation moved through the usual channels of Austin real estate, local politics, and a development project on the east side that two of Derek's business contacts were involved in. I contributed when called upon. I laughed when laughter was expected. I watched Elaine across the table do the same with a naturalness that I found simultaneously admirable and heartbreaking. It was over dessert that it happened. Derek reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, the same motion I registered with a cold jolt of recognition that he had made in the coffee shop when he produced the white envelope for Dr. Marsh and placed a single folded document on the table beside my dessert plate. "Dad," he said, his voice pitched at exactly the right register of casual concern, low enough to seem private, loud enough for the table to hear. I have been talking to some financial advisors this week about the trust restructuring. They put together a temporary financial power of attorney, just an interim measure completely standard, so that I can handle some of the administrative logistics on your behalf while the court matter is being sorted out. Nothing permanent, just to simplify things. He pushed the document an inch closer to my plate. Across the table, Brooke picked up her wine glass and watched me over the rim with her timer, smile fully engaged. I looked at the document. A financial power of attorney in Texas grants the named agent, in this case Derek, broad legal authority to make financial decisions on behalf of the principal, sign contracts, access accounts, execute transfers. If I had signed that paper at that dinner table, I would have handed Derek legal access to my trust before any court had ordered it voluntarily in front of witnesses, in a context he could later describe as freely given consent. I did not touch it. "I appreciate you thinking about it," I said, and my voice came out exactly as I needed it to, mild, slightly distracted, as if I were still thinking about the dessert. "Let me take a look at it this week and talk to Thomas before I sign anything. You know how he gets when I do paperwork without running it by him first." A beat of silence around the table. Derek's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes recalculated with the swift, imperceptible precision of a cash register. "Of course," he said. He picked the document up and folded it back into his jacket pocket, and his smile did not waver by a single degree. "No rush at all, Dad. Whenever you are ready." Brooke set her wine glass down with a small click. Donna, seated 2 chairs away from me, made a sound. It was not loud, barely audible above the table conversation, but I heard it because I had known her for 56 years, and I knew every register of every sound she made. It was the sound of a woman who had just watched something confirm a fear she had been carrying for months and could no longer pretend she had not seen. After dinner, while Derek and Brooke moved into the kitchen, Donna appeared at my elbow with the velocity of a woman who had been waiting for a private moment since she walked in the door. She gripped my arm and pulled me into the hallway with a strength that surprised me. "That document," she said, her voice pitched barely above a whisper, her eyes blazing and wet at the same time. "Walt, that was not about simplifying logistics. He was trying to get you to sign over access to your money, right there at the dinner table, in front of everyone." "I know," I said. "He has been planning this." Her voice broke on the last word, cracking open with the particular anguish of a person whose last remaining doubt has just been taken away from them. Her eyes spilled over, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth hard. "Oh, Walt, how long has this been going on?" I put my hands on her shoulders, and I felt her trembling slightly under my palms, not from cold but from the full belated weight of understanding landing on her all at once. "Long enough," I said, "but it is almost over. Almost over." She pulled back and looked at me with her wet, fierce eyes. "What does that mean? What are you and Elaine doing?" "Something that is going to require you to trust me for a little longer," I said, "and something I need you to be present for." She stared at me. Her jaw was working, and I could see her fighting down the questions, fighting down the impulse to demand every answer right now, fighting down everything except the one thing that had always defined her relationship with me: faith. The plain bedrock, 56 years in the making faith of a sister who had never once stopped believing her brother knew what he was doing, even when she was furious with him for not telling her why. "Fine," she said, and wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand in one decisive swipe. "Fine. But after this is over, Walter James Gaines, you are going to sit down and tell me every single thing. Every single thing I promised." She straightened her cardigan, lifted her chin, and walked back to the dinner table, looking like a woman who had cried for 30 seconds and was finished with it. I stood in the hallway for a moment longer, breathing carefully. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Elaine sent from 20 feet away at the dinner table. "Check your email when you get a moment. Tillman sent something." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked back to the table. Derek was refilling wine glasses, laughing at something one of his business contacts had said entirely at ease in his own house on a Sunday evening in April. The invitation arrived in my email the next morning. Thick cardstock, hand addressed, delivered to our physical mailbox with a first-class stamp. "Derek and Brooke Gaines request the pleasure of your company at a family gathering. Saturday, the 10th of May, 7 o'clock in the evening. 31 names on the guest list he had enclosed. Lawyers, business contacts, family friends, and at the bottom, listed simply as a health and wellness consultant, Dr. Fiona Marsh. Thomas called on Wednesday morning. One word in the text, come in. The meeting felt different from every previous one. The previous meetings had been about gathering and building. This one was about executing. Tillman was already in the conference room when we arrived, 3 folders arranged in front of him with the precise organization of a man who had run operations like this before. The arrest warrants were signed by a federal magistrate judge in the Northern District of Texas yesterday afternoon, Tillman said. Derek Allen Gaines, 4 counts. Wire fraud under 18 United States Code, Section 1343. Money laundering under 18 United States Code, Section 1956. Conspiracy to defraud, and financial exploitation of an elderly individual under Texas Penal Code Section 32.53. He paused. Brooke Christine Gaines is named as co-conspirator on wire fraud and obstruction. I looked at those folders and felt something strange, watching months of fear become procedural and real and finite. What do you need from us on the night? Elaine asked. A public statement of intent, Tillman said. On record in front of witnesses. Documents establish mechanism, but juries convict on moments. We need the moment. He looked at each of us in turn. Here is how it works. He turned to Elaine first. You carry the recorder and the financial documentation. Derek will create an opportunity because he cannot help himself. When he does, you use it. Elaine nodded. No hesitation. Tillman looked at Thomas. You attend as Walter's guest, legal witness. If Derek attempts any procedural challenge on the spot, you respond. Understood, Thomas said. Tillman looked at me. Your job is the hardest. You do nothing. You say nothing that escalates. You give Derek every reason to believe the evening is going exactly as planned. A beat. Can you do that? I thought about every Sunday dinner, every calculated smile across that table. Every time I had picked up a wine glass and performed normalcy while carrying what I knew like a stone behind my sternum. Yes, I said. Tillman turned to Donna, who was sitting straight-backed at the end of the table, with her hands folded and her jaw set hard. Mrs. Pierce, there will be a psychologist at this gathering, Dr. Fiona Marsh, listed on the invitation as a health and wellness consultant. When the situation breaks open, she will attempt to leave, quickly. He held Donna's gaze. I need her to remain on the premises until my team arrives. I cannot legally ask you to physically detain anyone, but if you happen to be standing in a doorway at the right moment, I will be in whatever doorway needs standing in, Donna said, and her voice did not waver by a single note. Calvin, sitting beside her, put his large hand over both of hers and squeezed once. She pressed her lips together and nodded. Tillman closed his portfolio. My team will be outside the property from 6:45 onward. We enter on Mrs. Holt's signal. He looked at Elaine. You decide when. I will know, she said simply. We walked out of Thomas's office into the late April afternoon, and the city felt simultaneously ordinary and completely transformed. The same streets, the same traffic on Congress Avenue, the same live oak trees just beginning to show their new spring leaves, and underneath all of it, this thing that was 2 weeks away from detonating. That night, I called Calvin from the back porch. He picked up on the second ring, and I told him not everything, not the federal charges or the warrants or the shell companies, but enough. Enough for him to understand what May 10th was and what it was going to cost. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long breath on the line, and then he said, Walt, are you all right? No, I said honestly, but I will be. You are going to have to look at your son across a dinner table and let it happen. Yes, that is going to be one of the hardest things you have ever done. I know. A pause. Then Calvin said in the quiet voice he used when he meant something all the way down. My grandmother had a saying she passed down to me. The truth does not need anyone to protect it. It stands on its own. You just have to be willing to stand beside it. I pressed the phone against my ear and looked out at Sandra's garden in the dark, the Texas sage gone silver under the porch light, the black-eyed Susans closed for the night. I will be there, I said. The night before the party, I sat alone in the reading room for a long time. On the shelf above the desk, Sandra smiled in the beach photograph, had thrown back the Gulf of Mexico wide and bright behind her, joy too large for any frame to hold. I looked at her for a long time, and my chest pulled tight with the full accumulated weight of everything the past 5 months had been. I did not ask her what to do. I already knew what to do. I just wanted her to know I was going to be okay. I turned off the light and went to bed. Tomorrow was May 10th. I woke at 5:17 without an alarm. The bedroom was still dark, the kind of deep pre-dawn dark that has weight to it. And I lay on my back, listening to Elaine's steady breathing beside me and thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. This was the day. After 5 months of patience and documentation and Sunday dinners that cost more than anyone watching from the outside could have understood, this was the day everything came to its conclusion. I got up without waking Elaine and went downstairs to make coffee. The kitchen was quiet and gray in the early light, and I stood at the walnut counter, Sandra's counter, the one she had chosen after 2 full renovations of deliberation. And I held my mug with both hands and let the house be quiet around me for a few minutes. Just that. Just the house and the coffee and the early light coming through the window over the sink. Elaine came downstairs at 6:30. She was already dressed the simple navy dress she had described to me the night before as the right thing for today, practical and unassuming. She poured her coffee, stood beside me at the counter, and we drank in companionable quiet for a moment that felt both ordinary and completely unlike any morning we had shared before. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like a man who knows what he has to do and wishes the doing of it was already behind him," I said. She looked at me over her mug. "That is the most honest answer you have ever given me to that question. Today seems like a day for honest answers." She set her mug down and straightened my collar, the same quick, precise gesture she had made the night we announced our engagement, the night Derek had set his glass down with that hard, cold click. Her fingers were steady. Mine, wrapped around my coffee mug, were not entirely. We left the house at 9 o'clock. The May morning was warm and clear, the kind of Austin spring day that exists in the narrow window between the last cold front of winter and the first genuine heat of summer. Blue sky, light breeze, the live oak trees along the street in full new leaf. Under any other circumstances, it would have been a beautiful morning. It still was, technically. Beauty does not stop being beauty because of what you are carrying. We pulled into the parking lot of Calvin's church at 9:20. He was waiting outside with Donna, both of them standing in the small courtyard beside the front steps in the morning sun. Donna was wearing her good wool cardigan, the gray one she saved for occasions, and when she saw our car turn in, she pressed both hands flat against her stomach, the way she did when she was frightened and trying not to show it. I got out of the car, and she crossed the courtyard in 4 fast steps and put her arms around me so tightly I felt the breath leave my body. "I am not going to cry," she said into my shoulder, in the voice of someone who was absolutely about to cry. "I decided this morning that I am not going to cry until after, so do not say anything that makes it difficult." "I am not saying anything," I said, and held her just as tightly. She pulled back and looked at my face with her wet, fierce eyes gripping both my arms. "You come home tonight," she said. "Both of you, that is all I'm asking." "We will," I said. Calvin put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me with the steady, weathered calm of a man who had stood beside people in the worst moments of their lives for 40 years and had never once looked away. "You ready, Walt?" he said. "No," I said honestly, "but I am going anyway." He smiled, not the broad, booming smile of Sunday mornings, but something quieter and more fundamental. "That is the only kind of ready that counts." He pulled me into a brief, firm embrace that smelled of cedar and old books, and then held me at arm's length. "You already know what you need to know," he said. "You have known it for a while now." "Yeah," I said. "I think I have." He nodded once slowly. "Then go stand beside it." We drove to Derek's neighborhood in the late morning, taking the long way around through the Tarrytown streets without consciously deciding to. I think we both needed the extra minutes. The neighborhood was quiet in the Saturday morning sun, sprinklers running on perfect lawns, a woman walking a dog on the shaded sidewalk, the ordinary unhurried texture of a weekend in a prosperous part of a prosperous city. Derek's house came into view at the end of the cul-de-sac, and even from a distance I could see the cars already lining both sides of the street, catering van in the driveway, string lights visible through the side gate draped through the backyard trees. The whole production of a man celebrating what he believed was his impending victory. I pulled to the curb half a block away and sat for a moment with the engine idling. "Walter," Elaine said. "I know," I said. "He is going to smile when he sees us." "I know. And you are going to smile back." I exhaled slowly through my nose, feeling the full weight of the evening ahead, settle across my shoulders like something physical. "I have been smiling at him for 5 months," I said. "I can manage 2 more hours." I pulled back onto the street. Derek was standing at the front gate when we turned into the cul-de-sac, a glass of sparkling water in his hand, already working the arrival of his guests with the easy practiced warmth of a man entirely confident in his position. When he saw our car, he raised his glass and grinned wide, genuine seeming, the full wattage smile of someone who believed completely that tonight was his. I parked the car. I got out. I walked toward my son across the warm May evening with my wife beside me, and everything I knew about him pressing against the inside of my chest like a fist. "Dad," Derek said, and clasped my hand hard. "You made it. Tonight is going to be a great night." "It really is," I said. I smiled at him with everything I had. The party was beautiful. I want to say that clearly because it was true, and because there is something particularly cruel about beautiful things that are built on ugly foundations. Derek and Brooke had transformed the backyard into something genuinely lovely: string lights through the live oak canopy, round tables with white linen, a catered spread along the far wall that smelled of smoked meat and fresh bread, a bartender in a white jacket mixing drinks at a station near the back fence. 31 people moving through the warm May evening with wine glasses and that easy conversation, the sound of laughter carrying up into the darkening Texas sky. For 45 minutes, it was almost possible to forget. I moved through the party the way I had learned to move through the Sunday dinners, present enough to be unremarkable, distant enough to keep my footing. I shook hands with Derek's business contacts, exchanged pleasantries with the cousins I had not seen in 2 years, accepted a glass of wine from the bartender, and held it without drinking much. Thomas Brightwell stood near the back fence with a plate of food and the relaxed, unhurried posture of a man at a party he was genuinely enjoying, which I knew was the most disciplined performance in the backyard. Donna stayed close to Elaine, not conspicuously, just close the way a person stays close to something they have been asked to protect. Dr. Fiona Marsh was at the corner table near the side gate, exactly where she had been in my imagination every time I had rehearsed this evening over the past 2 weeks. She had a glass of white wine and a small notebook open on the table in front of her, the leather portfolio's smaller cousin, and every few minutes her eyes moved to me with the careful clinical attention of someone taking inventory. She was not socializing, she was working. Every time her gaze landed on me, I felt the back of my neck prickle with a cold, specific fury that I converted through sheer force of will into nothing at all. A blank face, a neutral smile, a 60-year-old man enjoying a party. It was Derek's voice that shifted the evening's temperature. He had been circling, I had watched him do it, the gradual, patient tightening of his orbit around Elaine, each pass a few degrees closer than the last, each exchange a fraction more pointed. By the time the sky had deepened to full dark above the string lights, he had positioned himself beside her at the edge of the bar station, with the ease of someone arriving at a destination he had always intended to reach. I was 20 feet away talking to a cousin about nothing I can now remember. I watched Derek lean toward Elaine, his body angled to put his back to most of the party, a move that looked casual and was anything but. He said something low. She responded briefly. He laughed loud enough to carry and put his hand on the back of her chair. The muscle in my jaw locked so hard I thought I could hear it. Then I saw Brooke. She had moved to the far corner of the patio, half behind a large potted agave, and she had her phone in both hands, thumbs moving fast, not filming, texting, the focused rapid-fire texting of someone sending a message that mattered. Across the party, Elaine saw it too. I watched it happen the precise moment Elaine's gaze shifted from Derek to Brooke and back again, the microsecond of calculation that crossed her face so quickly that only someone who had been watching her face for 5 months would have caught it. She read what Brooke was doing, and she understood what it meant, and something in her expression settled into a finality that made my heart slam against my ribs. She looked at me across the 20 feet of party between us. Her gray eyes were clear and certain and completely calm. She gave the smallest nod I had ever seen, barely a degree of movement, the kind of signal that existed only for someone who knew to look for it. It was time. Derek chose that exact moment to lean down close to Elaine's ear, not whispering, performing his voice, pitched at exactly the register that would carry to the nearest tables. "You know," he said loud enough for 6 people to hear, clearly, "a woman as sharp as you could have had her pick of situations. You sure you want to spend whatever years you have left managing an old man's anxieties? Someone nearby made a sharp intake of breath. I went completely still. Elaine turned to face Derek with the unhurried, absolute composure of someone who had been waiting for precisely this sentence for 5 months. She reached into her handbag. Her hand came out with a small black digital recorder. She placed it on the bar top between them, with a sound so quiet it should not have been audible above the party noise, but somehow, in the way that significant sounds always cut through ambient noise, every person within 30 feet heard it. "Derek," she said, and her voice carried across the suddenly quieting backyard like a blade through still water. "If this has always been about loyalty, then let's find out exactly where everyone's loyalty really lies." Her thumb moved to the play button. The backyard went silent. Before I reveal what Elaine placed on that table and what happened in the next 60 seconds that left 31 people completely speechless, comment the word "ready" if you have been waiting for this moment as long as Walter has. One small note. This story weaves in some fictional elements for narrative and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names, places, or situations is entirely coincidental, but everything this story is reaching toward is something worth sitting with. She pressed play. The recording began with the ambient sound I recognized immediately. The front entryway of our own house, the particular echo of the hallway, where Derek had stood with his peonies and his careful threats in a space where he had believed completely that he was in control and completely alone with a woman he had already underestimated. And then my son's voice filled the backyard with a clarity that left absolutely no room for misinterpretation. "Keep doing what you're doing at the dinners. The more time she spends looking like she's got her hooks in the old man, the stronger our case gets. Dad loses his temper in front of witnesses, or he breaks down, either works. The psych evaluation goes and the petition gets approved, and we have control of the trust before any court date." A pause on the recording. Then Derek's own voice returned lighter now, with the particular ease of a man answering a question he had already been asked a dozen times. "And if he figures it out, he won't. He's 60 years old, and he's in love. People that age stop seeing clearly. That's the whole point." The recording clicked off. For 3 full seconds, the backyard produced no sound whatsoever. Not a glass set down. Not a foot shifted on the patio stones. Not a breath that anyone was willing to let be heard. 31 people stood in the warm May night under the string lights and the live oak canopy and absorbed what they had just heard, with the particular stunned stillness of witnesses who understand all at once that they have been brought here to see something they cannot unsee. Then the sounds came back all at once, a sharp, involuntary gasp from somewhere to my left, a cousin saying, "Oh my God," in a voice stripped of all social veneer, the clatter of a wine glass hitting the edge of a table and being caught just before it fell. Derek's face had done something I had never seen it do in 34 years. The surface had simply left. All of it. The easy confidence, the practiced warmth, the social architecture he had been constructing and maintaining his entire adult life. Gone in the space of those 3 seconds, replaced by something raw and exposed and frightened that I would not have recognized as my son's face if I had not been standing 15 feet away from it. Brooke made a sound, a single high broken sound, and her phone slipped out of her hands and hit the patio with a crack that split the screen straight across. She stared at it on the ground and did not bend to pick it up. Her legs seemed to be having difficulty with their primary function. She reached for the back of the nearest chair and gripped it with both hands, her knuckles draining white. At the corner table, Dr. Fiona Marsh closed her notebook, picked up her bag with the rapid, precise movements of a woman executing an exit she had pre-planned, and stood. Donna was already moving. I do not know exactly when she started moving, sometime in those 3 seconds of silence, I think, while everyone else was frozen. She crossed the patio with a speed that was startling in a 56-year-old retired school teacher, and by the time Dr. Marsh took her first step toward the side gate, Donna was standing in it. Not aggressively, not with her arms out, just there, filling the doorway with the absolute immovable certainty of a woman who had been given one job and intended to do it. Dr. Marsh stopped. She looked at Donna. Donna looked back at her with an expression that was polite and completely inflexible. "I think," Donna said pleasantly, "that it would be better for everyone if you stayed for a little while longer." Derek took 2 steps toward Elaine and the recorder, his hand coming up, and then he stopped. He stopped because Thomas Brightwell was standing directly in his path, having moved from the back fence with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. And Thomas was a foot shorter than Derek and 30 years older, and he did not move 1 inch. "I would strongly advise against touching that device," Thomas said in the quiet, absolute tone of someone who has spent 40 years being the calmest person in difficult rooms, or anything else on that table. Derek turned to me. His chest was heaving, his jaw was working, his eyes, Sandra's dark eyes. The eyes I had looked into on the night he was born and felt my entire understanding of what mattered permanently. Rearranged were wide and desperate and stripped of every layer he had ever built between himself and the world. "Dad." His voice broke completely on the single syllable. It cracked open the way green wood cracks from the inside out, splitting along a grain that had always been there. "Dad, just say something. Please. You're my father." The backyard was watching. 31 people, the catering staff, the bartender in his white jacket, all of them watching me in the warm May night under the string lights, waiting to see what a 60-year-old man does when the child he carried on his shoulders and taught to ride a bicycle and paid for and prayed for and loved without condition. For 3 decades looks at him across a patio and says, "Please." I looked at my son for a long time. I looked at him the way you look at something you are memorizing because you understand with a grief that goes deeper than anger that you are never going to see it the same way again. Then I said, "You called it a loyalty test." My voice was steady. I do not entirely know how, but it was steady. "You called it a loyalty test from the very beginning. You said we would find out where everyone's loyalty really lies." I held his gaze and felt the full weight of everything I had ever felt for him, every bedtime story, every baseball game, every proud, ordinary, irreplaceable moment of raising a child, pressing against the inside of my chest like a tide against a seawall. "Now we know." Derek's face crumpled, not gradually all at once the way a structure fails when its central support gives way. His mouth opened and closed, and the sound that came out of it was something I had not heard from him since he was 8 years old and genuinely hurt. It was not strategic, it was not performative, it was just grief. His grief finally without architecture. I could not comfort it. That was the thing that nearly undid me entirely, standing close enough to reach him, and understanding that comfort was no longer mine to give, that whatever came next was the consequence of choices he had made with full knowledge and intent, and that loving him did not change that, and never would. Elaine stepped to my side. She did not say anything. She simply stood there, her shoulder against mine, her presence steady and solid and completely present. From somewhere beyond the side gate I heard the sound of car doors. Derek found his voice before the gate opened. It came back to him the way survival instinct comes back, not gracefully, not with any of his usual polish, but hard and fast and desperate, the last move of a man who understood that the next 60 seconds were going to determine everything. "That recording is inadmissible," he said, and his voice had pulled itself back from the edge of breaking into something that was trying very hard to be authoritative. He pointed at the recorder on the bar top. "She recorded a private conversation without consent. That is an illegal wiretap. Nothing on that device can be used in any legal proceeding." Several of the guests looked at each other. Someone nearby exhaled with the sound of a person who was not sure which way to lean. Derek pressed forward, his eyes moving around the assembled guests with the rapid, calculating sweep of a man trying to reconstruct a collapsing narrative in real time. "This is what she does. This is exactly what I have been trying to protect my father from, a woman who came into this family with an agenda, who has been gathering information illegally, who—" "Derek!" Thomas Brightwell's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Thomas stepped forward and addressed the backyard with the measured, unhurried authority of a man who had spent 4 decades being the person in the room who actually knew what the law said. Texas Penal Code, Section 16.02. He said, establishes that audio recording is entirely lawful when at least one party to the conversation consents to the recording. Mrs. Holt was a direct participant in every conversation on that device. Her consent is sufficient. There is no wiretap. There is no illegal surveillance. There is a legal recording of statements made voluntarily by the individuals whose voices appear on it. He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Furthermore, he continued, the financial documentation Mrs. Holt compiled was drawn entirely from account records to which Mr. Gaines has full and unrestricted legal access as the sole trustee of his own revocable trust. Every document in that file was obtained through entirely lawful means. Derek's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The side gate swung open. Agent Roy Tillman walked through it, first followed by 2 FBI agents in plain clothes and 2 uniformed Austin Police Department officers. They moved across the patio with the quiet, purposeful efficiency of people who had done this many times and understood that the absence of drama was itself a form of authority. Tillman stopped in the center of the patio and looked at Derek with the flat, direct gaze I had first seen across Thomas's conference table. "Mr. Gaines," he said, addressing Derek, "at approximately 1 o'clock this afternoon, a formal criminal complaint and a complete forensic financial package were submitted to the FBI Financial Crimes Division and the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Texas. The complaint documents 4 counts including wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud, and financial exploitation of an elderly individual." He paused. "Every account associated with Brightstone Capital Advisors and its affiliated entities has been placed under an administrative freeze effective as of 3 o'clock this afternoon." Brooke made a sound like the air leaving a punctured tire. She pulled her phone from her pocket with shaking hands, looked at the screen, and the color drained from her face so completely she looked like a photograph of herself rather than the actual person. "My accounts," she said to no one in particular, in a voice barely above a whisper. It is all frozen." Tillman looked at her briefly. "Yes, Mrs. Gaines, that is correct." Derek turned to Dr. Marsh, who was still standing at the side gate with Donna blocking her exit, and something frantic and grasping moved across his face. "Tell them," he said, his voice cracking badly. "Tell them about the evaluation. Tell them what you found." Dr. Marsh looked at Derek for a long moment. Then she looked at her leather portfolio. Then she looked at Thomas Brightwell, who was already looking at her with an expression of complete professional attention. "Dr. Marsh," Thomas said quietly, "I represent Mr. Walter Gaines. I would strongly recommend that before you say anything further, you consider that your preliminary psychological assessment of a patient you have never clinically examined, produced in exchange for compensation from the petitioning party, represents a violation of Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists ethical guidelines sufficiently serious to result in license revocation." He tilted his head slightly. "I would also recommend you remain available for the investigators." Dr. Marsh sat back down. Her portfolio stayed closed. The 2 officers moved toward Derek with the unhurried, practiced efficiency of people performing a procedure they had performed many times before, and something about that unhurriedness, the complete absence of drama in their approach, made it more devastating than if they had rushed. Derek took 1 step back, just 1. Then he stopped and I watched something go out of him, not the social surface that had already gone, but something deeper, the last of whatever had been holding him upright through the past 15 minutes. His shoulders dropped. His chin came down. He looked for one unguarded moment exactly like the 8-year-old boy who had fallen off his bicycle on Ridgewood Drive, except that this time there was nothing I could carry him away from. Agent Tillman stepped forward, and his voice was level and clear and carried across the silent backyard without effort. "Derek Allen Gaines, you are under arrest. Wire fraud in violation of 18 United States Code, Section 1343. Money laundering in violation of 18 United States Code, Section 1956. Conspiracy to defraud. And financial exploitation of an elderly individual in violation of Texas Penal Code, Section 32.53. He nodded to the officers. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." The handcuffs went on with a sound that was very small and very final. Across the patio, a second officer moved toward Brooke. She did not step back. She simply stood where she was, with her arms hanging at her sides and her ruined phone on the patio stones at her feet. And when the officer spoke to her, she nodded once mechanically, like a person who has stopped processing and is simply executing the next physical instruction her body receives. When the cuffs closed around her wrists, she made a sound, a small compressed sound, high and tight, and her eyes closed. The 31 guests had not moved. They stood distributed across the backyard in the positions they had occupied when the recording played, and the expression on every face was a variation of the same thing, the particular stunned gravity of people who had believed they were attending a party and understood now that they had attended something else entirely. Derek turned to me. "I had known he would. I had known it the way you know the last beat of a piece of music you have heard enough times to carry in your body, not intellectually, but in the bone. His eyes found mine across the patio, and what was in them was nothing I had prepared myself for adequately. Not anger, not calculation, not the cold assessing intelligence I had been watching across dinner tables for 5 months. Just a son, terrified, looking at his father, Dad. His voice came out broken and young and stripped of every year of adult architecture he had ever built. Dad, please, you are my father. Say something. Tell them we can work this out. Tell them I am your son. My throat closed so completely I could not have spoken for a full 5 seconds even if I had known what to say. I looked at my son. This person I had made, this person I had loved, without condition or reservation for 34 years. This person who had sat across from me at Sunday dinner tables and smiled at me with his mother's dark eyes while building a legal structure designed to erase me from my own life. I felt every year of it, every bedtime and baseball game and argument about curfews and proud ordinary moment of watching a child become a person. I felt all of it pressing against the inside of my chest at once, and for one long, terrible second, I understood what it would cost to say what I was about to say and said it anyway. You called it a loyalty test, I said. My voice was quiet and it was steady, and those were the two things I needed it to be. From the very first night, you stood in my living room and looked at my wife, and you called it a loyalty test. I held his gaze and felt the grief of it move through me like a tide moving through something that will not break. Now we both know what that test measured, and we both know who failed it. Derek's face broke apart completely. Not the social surface, not the architecture. The face underneath all of it, the actual face, the one that had looked up at me from a hospital blanket 34 years ago. When I first understood what the word father meant, that face broke open with a grief that had nowhere left to hide. He was crying, not strategically, not performatively, just crying the way people cry when there is nothing left to protect. The officers walked him toward the gate. He did not look back. Brooke was escorted out behind him, her head down her steps, mechanical. Dr. Marsh remained seated at her corner table, with Thomas standing nearby, her portfolio in her lap, and her hands very still. The gate closed. For a moment the backyard held its breath. Then Donna was beside me. She did not say anything. She put both arms around me from the side and pressed her face against my shoulder and held on with the fierce, wordless tenacity of someone who understood that what I needed right now was not comfort or wisdom or any particular thing except the simple physical presence of someone who loved me. My eyes burned. My throat ached. I pressed my hand against the back of her head and held on too. On my other side, Elaine stepped close and took my hand, not dramatically, not with any gesture designed to be seen, just her hand warm and steady and completely present, her fingers closing around mine in the quiet dark under the string lights. Calvin appeared from somewhere in the dispersing crowd of stunned guests and stopped in front of me. He looked at my face for a moment without speaking. Then he put his large weathered hand on my shoulder, just the weight of it, and nodded once. No words. Some things have already been said. I stood there between my sister and my wife with my pastor's hand on my shoulder, and I breathed the warm May night air, and somewhere beyond the gate I heard the sound of car engines starting and moving away down the quiet street. It was over. 3 months later, I am sitting on the back porch of a house I have never lived in before. It is smaller than the Westlake Hills house, 1 story, 3 bedrooms, a backyard, with a live oak that was here long before we arrived and will be here long after we leave. The neighborhood is quiet in the way that certain Austin neighborhoods are quiet on August evenings, cicadas in the trees, the smell of someone's grill. 2 houses down the last light, going gold, and then amber over the rooftops to the west. I sold the Westlake Hills house in June. It was the right thing to do, and I knew it the way you know certain things. Not because you reasoned your way to the conclusion, but because the conclusion was simply there one morning when you woke up settled and clear. That house had been Sandra's house, and then my grief's house, and then, for the last year of its life in my possession, the house where I had learned what my son had become. It deserved to belong to someone who could love it without any of that weight. Here is what the 3 months have looked like in practical terms. Derek accepted a plea agreement in late July. 9 years in a federal correctional facility, wire fraud and money laundering the charges that carried the most evidentiary weight. the financial exploitation charge under Texas Penal Code, Section 32.53, added 2 years to the sentencing calculation before the plea reduction. He will be 43 when he is released if he serves the minimum. Brooke received 3 years of supervised probation and surrendered her financial advisory license. She is living with her mother in San Antonio. I do not know more than that, and I have not tried to find out more than that. Dr. Fiona Marsh's license was revoked by the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists in a proceeding that Thomas told me was unusually swift. Apparently, the board does not look kindly on members who sign clinical assessments of patients they have never met in exchange for cash in a coffee shop envelope. The trust was frozen for 6 weeks during the federal investigation. On the 43rd day, Thomas called me at 8 in the morning and said 4 words. "It's clean. It's yours." I sat down on the kitchen floor of the new house and pressed my back against the cabinets and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since April. Donna calls every evening at 7. Sometimes we talk for an hour, sometimes for 10 minutes. Last week she called to tell me she had found a Wallace Stegner novel at a used bookstore and bought it for Elaine without telling her which one, which made Elaine laugh in the way I had first heard her laugh at the church gala 11 months ago. Surprised and genuine and completely unguarded. I had forgotten somewhere in the middle of everything that she laughed like that. I am glad I remembered. Tonight, Elaine is sitting in the other porch chair with a book open in her lap, though she has not turned a page in 20 minutes. The August evening is warm and soft around us. The cicadas are loud in the live oak overhead, and the last of the daylight is fading slowly over the rooftops. I think about Derek sometimes. I will not pretend otherwise, and I will not pretend it does not hurt, because it does a specific unresolvable hurt that I suspect I will carry in some form for the rest of my life. He was my son before he was anything else. That does not change because of what he chose to become. But I also think about the night at the church gala when Elaine looked up from a stack of programs and shook my hand with a firm, dry grip and asked me what I liked to read. I think about the walnut counter, the beach photograph, Sandra laughing with her head thrown back. I think about what it means to have 60 years behind you and still have mornings ahead that are worth getting up for. Elaine turns a page. Outside the live oak, the first star of the evening appears in the darkening Texas sky, faint and certain above the amber rooftops. I pick up my coffee. I am 60 years old, and I am okay. I have told you this family story, not because I am proud of every part of it, but because I believe someone listening right now needs to hear it. Here is what I know, after everything that happened in that fragile, complicated state of mind we call family, that place where love and obligation and history are so tangled together you cannot always see where one ends and the other begins. God has a way of placing the right person beside you at exactly the right moment. For me, that person was a quiet woman with gray eyes who asked me what I liked to read and never once asked what I was worth. My personal advice: do not wait until you are standing at a mailbox holding a court document with your own name on it. Do not mistake regular phone calls for love. Do not confuse someone's need for your assets with their love for your existence. I waited too long to see clearly. Please do not make my mistake. If this family story of betrayal and hard-won peace found something in you, leave a comment below. Tell me what stayed with you. Share this family betrayal story with someone who needs to hear it today. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thank you sincerely for staying until the very end. Before you go, a note: I want to be upfront about some of the stories on this channel are built around fictional elements shaped for reflection and meaningful storytelling, rather than documentary fact. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, there is absolutely no hard feeling in stepping away and finding something that serves you better. But if the heart of what you heard today stayed with you in some way, then it did exactly what it was meant to do.